In the year 2012, a small mountain town in eastern Sardinia did something no other place on earth had ever done. Perdasdefogu, a village of barely 1,800 people, produced 9 living brothers and sisters whose ages, added together, reached 818 years. Guinness verified it. The eldest, a woman named Consolata Melis, was 105 that summer. Her sister Claudina was 99. Between the 9 of them, not one had ever lived in a city. Not one had ever followed a diet plan. And when reporters climbed the winding road into the Ogliastra highlands to ask the obvious question, the answer they got was almost insulting in its simplicity. Consolata pointed to a pot on her stove. She said she had eaten the same bowl of soup nearly every day of her life. I have spent years reading the records that families like the Melises leave behind, and I want to walk you through exactly what was in that pot, and why it may matter more than anything sold in a pharmacy. Let me begin with the soup itself, because everything else grows out of it. The Sardinians call it Minestrone, but that word does it no justice. In Perdasdefogu, it was a 3-bean minestrone, and Consolata made it the same way her mother had. She started with whatever beans were drying in the pantry, usually borlotti, sometimes chickpeas, sometimes the pale flat fava. 3 kinds, never one. Then she added the vegetables that were standing in the garden that morning. Not vegetables chosen from a list. Vegetables chosen by the season. This is the first thing most people miss about how these elders ate. They did not eat the same 10 foods all year. They ate 40 or 50 different plants across the seasons, and the soup pot was where all of them eventually met. In winter, the pot held Savoy cabbage, the dark crinkled kind that survives a frost. It held chard, both the leaves and the pink stems chopped fine. It held celery, fennel bulb, a potato or 2 for body, and the last of the autumn squash. In spring, the same pot took on wild asparagus tips, young broad beans still soft enough to eat skin and all, and the first bitter dandelion from the field edges. The base never changed. The cast of vegetables rotated with the calendar. A modern nutritionist, counting Consolata's plant intake over a single year, would have lost track somewhere past 40 species. That diversity was not a health strategy. It was simply what a poor mountain family ate when the supermarket was the patch of dirt behind the house. Now I want you to notice what was almost never in that pot: meat. The Melisiblings were not vegetarians, and I am not going to pretend they were. On a feast day, there might be a piece of pork or a little lamb at Easter, but the daily soup carried no meat at all. The protein came from those 3 beans, simmered until they fell apart and thickened the broth into something closer to a stew. When researchers from the University of Sassari began studying the Ogliastra Centenarians, this is one of the patterns that stopped them cold. The animal protein in the daily diet was low, steady, and small. Most of the protein arrived from plants, eaten not in one large evening serving, but spread across the whole day in modest amounts. The body of a person eating this way keeps its growth signals turned down. The molecular pathway that drives cells to grow fast, the one scientists call more, stays quiet. And a quiet growth signal, year after year, is one of the most consistent findings in the entire science of long life. There is a second thing in that pot worth slowing down for, and it is the bread that went into it. The Melises did not eat soup alone. They tore day-old sourdough into the bowl and let it soak. Their bread was modazosu, a dense Sardinian sourdough raised with a living starter. The family kept alive for years, sometimes decades. This is not the bread you buy sealed in plastic. A real sourdough ferment does something to grain that fast commercial yeast cannot. The wild bacteria in the starter pre-digest part of the starch and break down a portion of the gluten before the loaf ever reaches the oven. They also lower the bread's effect on blood sugar. A slice of true long-fermented sourdough raises blood glucose far less than the same weight of ordinary white bread. Consolata ate bread every single day of her 107 years. She also never developed the blood sugar problems that we now treat as almost inevitable after 60. The bread was not the enemy. The way the bread was made was the whole story. Let me bring her sister into this, because Claudina ate the same way, and her body told the same tale. Consolata Melis lived surrounded by the work that kept her moving. There was no retirement in Perdasdefogu, in any sense we would recognize. The garden needed tending, the bread needed kneading, and kneading a dense sourdough by hand is real labor for the shoulders and arms. Water was carried. Hills were climbed because the whole village sits on a slope. The food gave the raw material, but the constant low-grade movement is what turned that material into a body that kept working past 100. I raise this because I do not want you to think a bowl of soup is a magic charm. It was one piece of a life. The soup mattered because of everything that surrounded it. Now, I want to add a food. The Melis household ate that most people never connect to long life, and that is fresh sheep's ricotta. Sardinia is sheep country. There are more sheep on that island than people, and have been for a very long time. The cheese most outsiders know is aged pecorino, hard and salty. But the everyday dairy in a house like Consolata's was the soft, fresh ricotta made from the whey left over after the hard cheese was pressed. It was eaten within a day or two, lightly, a spoonful beside the bread, sometimes stirred into the soup at the end. Fresh sheep ricotta is a different food from the aged cheese. It carries more whey protein, the fast kind rich in the amino acid that signals a muscle to rebuild. It is gentle on the gut. And it delivered a small, steady supply of high-quality protein without the heavy load of a meat-centered meal. This is the pattern again. Small amounts, high quality, spread across the day, never a single heavy hit. I have read enough of these family records to tell you that the most powerful thing about the Melis diet is not any one ingredient. It is the rhythm. Most of us think of food as events. Breakfast, lunch, a big dinner. The Melis siblings ate in a steadier line. A little bread and ricotta in the morning. The great pot of bean and vegetable soup at midday, the main meal, eaten when the sun was high. Something light in the evening, often just bread soaked in the same soup, or a piece of seasonal fruit. The largest meal sat in the middle of the day, when the body had hours of movement ahead to use it. The night was light. We have nearly reversed this. We skip or rush the daytime meals and then eat our largest plate at night, just before we lie down. The Sardinian order put the fuel where the work was. I want to take a moment on the beans themselves, because they are the engine of the whole system, and they are wildly undervalued today. When the Sassari researchers compared the long-lived pockets of the world, beans showed up in every single one. Sardinia had its minestrone. The Japanese island elders had their soy. The Costa Rican elders had black beans. The Californians had them too. A bean eaten daily is one of the few foods that tracks with long life across cultures that share almost nothing else. In the Melis pot, the 3-bean mix did several things at once. The protein fed the muscle without raising the growth signals the way meat does. The soluble fiber slowed the meal's effect on blood sugar to a gentle rise. And the fiber that the body cannot digest traveled all the way to the colon, where the resident bacteria ferment it into short molecules called short-chain fatty acids. Those molecules feed the cells lining the gut, calm inflammation throughout the body, and there is growing evidence they help the body hold on to muscle as it ages. A daily bean habit is, quietly, one of the most studied longevity practices on Earth, and the Melis family ran the experiment for a century without knowing it. Here is something else I noticed studying their meals. There was very little sugar, and almost no sugar that came in a package. Sweetness arrived as fruit, in season, eaten whole. Figs in late summer hung to dry for winter. Grapes, a wedge of melon, the prickly pear that grows wild on the rocks. The sweetness was always wrapped in fiber and water, which is the form the human body is built to handle. There was no morning glass of juice, no flavored yogurt, no breakfast cereal, no sweetened coffee drink. When sugar comes wrapped in a whole fruit, the fiber slows it down, and the body barely notices. When it comes stripped and concentrated, it floods the bloodstream and forces the pancreas to scramble. The Melis siblings reached their hundreds with pancreases that had never once been asked to handle that flood. I should be honest with you about the wine, because people always ask. Yes, there was wine. Sardinia makes a dark red called Cannonau, and a small glass appeared at the midday meal, alongside the soup in company. But I want to be careful here, because the wine is the most misunderstood part of this story. The benefit, to whatever degree it existed, came from a small amount, taken slowly, with food, surrounded by family. It was never drinking the way we mean drinking. It was a sip that punctuated a long shared meal. If you take one lesson from the wine, let it be the meal around it, not the glass. That brings me to the part of this, that no kitchen scale can measure, and that I have come to believe matters as much as the food. The Melis siblings ate together every day for their entire lives. 9 of them, plus children and grandchildren, in and out of the same houses on the same narrow streets. The midday soup was not eaten alone at a counter. It was eaten at a full table, slowly, with conversation, often lasting an hour or more. We now have real research showing that isolation in old age does measurable harm to the body, raising the stress hormones that wear down the heart and the immune system. The Melis siblings were almost never alone. Consolata, at 105, still had 8 living brothers and sisters to argue with. That is a kind of medicine we have no pill for, and it was served at every meal alongside the bread. I want to address the question that always comes up next, because it is a fair one. Was it the food, or was it the blood? Perdasdefogu sits in a corner of Sardinia, where the families have lived in near isolation for thousands of years, marrying within the same valleys, passing down the same lineages. Geneticists have found that the people of Ogliastra carry an unusually narrow set of genes, a founder population that drifted apart from the rest of Europe long ago. So yes, the Melis siblings almost certainly inherited something helpful. But here is the part that matters for you and me. When researchers followed Sardinians who left the mountains for the cities of the mainland, and who traded the soup pot for the modern plate, their longevity advantage faded within a generation. The genes stayed the same. The food and the life changed, and the long lives stopped arriving. That is the clearest evidence we could ask for, that the pot mattered, not just the bloodline. You cannot borrow their genes. You can borrow their lunch. Let me go deeper into those winter vegetables, because they are doing more than filling the bowl. Savoy cabbage and chard belong to families of plants that build bitter, sulfur-rich compounds as they grow. Those compounds are mildly stressful to the plant's predators, and when we eat them, they nudge our own cells into a low-grade defensive state, switching on the body's internal repair and antioxidant machinery. It is a gentle, repeated, daily stress that keeps the system tuned, the same principle behind why a little exercise strengthens rather than harms. The dark leafy greens also carry natural nitrates, which the body converts into a molecule that relaxes and widens the blood vessels. A daily bowl heavy with greens is, in a quiet way, a daily dose of something that keeps the arteries supple. The Melis siblings ate that bowl for a century, and the local doctors who examined them late in life kept remarking on how clean and open their vessels remained. There was also the matter of how the soup was finished, and this is a detail I love because it is so easy to copy. The pot simmered for hours over a low flame, beans and vegetables breaking down together, but the olive oil was not cooked into it from the start. A good part of it was poured in raw, at the very end, a generous stream over the top of each bowl just before eating. This is not a small thing. Heating olive oil for hours degrades the fragile protective compounds that make it valuable. Pouring it in raw at the table preserves them. The fat also does something useful to the meal as a whole. It slows the speed at which the body absorbs everything else in the bowl, flattening the rise in blood sugar even further, and it helps the body pull the protective pigments out of the cooked vegetables, since many of those pigments only dissolve in fat. A bowl of vegetables eaten with a stream of good raw oil delivers far more of its value than the same bowl eaten plain. I keep returning to fennel and celery, the humble aromatics at the base of nearly every pot, because they were eaten in a quantity we would find strange. These were not a pinch of flavoring. A whole bulb of fennel, several ribs of celery, an onion, sometimes wild fennel gathered from the roadside, all went in. These plants carry compounds that have long been used to ease digestion and calm the gut, and a gut that is calm and working well is the foundation of getting value from everything else you eat. The Melis siblings, by every account, had iron digestions into extreme old age. They were feeding the gut a steady stream of fiber, fermented bread, fresh dairy cultures, and these gentle aromatic plants day after day, and the gut repaid them. Let me say a little more about the discipline of the seasons, because I think it is the hardest part for us to recreate and maybe the most important. The Melis kitchen had no freezer full of the same vegetables year-round. What grew, they ate. When it stopped growing, they stopped eating it and moved to the next thing. This forced variety on them, whether they wanted it or not. Over a year, their bodies met an enormous range of different plant compounds, each in its season, never the same narrow handful for months on end. We have engineered that variety out of our lives. We can eat identical food every single week of the year, and most of us do. The simplest way to borrow the Melis pattern is not to find their exact vegetables. It is to let the calendar choose for you, to eat what is actually in season near you, and to let it change as the months change. The diversity takes care of itself. And I want to give Claudina the last word among the siblings, because she said something to a reporter that has stayed with me. Asked for the secret, she did not mention a single food. She talked about work and about never stopping. The two ideas, the food and the movement, were not separate in her mind. The garden that grew the soup was the same garden that kept her bending and lifting and walking at 99. The bread that fed her was the bread her own arms had kneaded. There was no line in her life between eating well and living actively, because the food came from the work, and the work came from the food. We have severed that connection completely. Our food arrives in a bag, and our exercise happens, if it happens at all, in a separate building. The Melis siblings never split the two apart, and I suspect that wholeness is a quiet part of why their bodies lasted. So, let me gather this together, because I do not want you to leave with a list of exotic Sardinian words you will never use. The point was never the matazosu bread or the wild dandelion. The point is the pattern underneath, and the pattern travels. It works in any kitchen. Eat beans nearly every day, more than one kind. Build your meals around plants, dozens of different ones across the year, following whatever is actually in season near you. Keep meat small and occasional, a flavor rather than a foundation. Get your bread truly fermented and your dairy fresh and modest, leaning on the gentle proteins rather than the heavy ones. Eat your largest meal in the daylight when your body can spend it, and keep the night light. Let your sweetness come wrapped in whole fruit, and eat it all, whenever you possibly can, at a table with other people, slowly, without a screen. Consolata Melis died in 2015 at the age of 107. Her daily soup outlived almost everyone who ever doubted it. She never took a supplement designed in a laboratory. She never counted a macronutrient. She ate 3 beans, the vegetables from her garden, a piece of fermented bread, a spoonful of fresh cheese, a little fruit, a small glass of wine, and the company of the people she loved. Then she did it again the next day, and the next, for more than 100 years. The science we have spent fortunes assembling keeps arriving, finding after finding, at the same pot, on the same stove, in the same small town. Maybe the longest lives were never hiding a secret at all. Maybe they were just doing the simple things every single day for a very long time. And maybe that is the most hopeful news of all, because the soup is still something any one of us could start making tomorrow.